These ancient punishments are so crazy, you'd think they could never be real, but every single one was actually used. And the really scary thing is, some are still being used today. So let's get dark. Let's kick things off with something crazy. Rat torture. It was used for centuries, across multiple different continents, and it's as disgusting as it sounds. You're tied down so you can't move, while a big metal pot or cage gets strapped directly against your stomach or your back. Then, your torturers put starving rats inside. But then comes the truly evil part. They start heating the pot from the outside. Hot coals, open flames, whatever works. And as the metal gets hotter and hotter, the rats inside start to panic. They're trapped, they're burning, and they need a way out. That's when they start digging, straight through your skin, your muscles, and your organs. The rats aren't trying to kill you, they're just trying to escape. But the only way out is through your body, and they'll chew and claw and burrow as deep as they have to. You're awake for all of it, feeling every bite, every scratch, and there's nothing you can do but scream. But as brutal as that was, at least it was over in a matter of hours. The Romans had something worse, and it was reserved for one crime and one crime only: killing your own family. They called it poina kule, the punishment of the sack. First, they'd beat you with blood-red rods in front of a crowd. Then they'd cover your head with a wolf skin, strap wooden shoes onto your feet, and parade you through the streets in a black sack, while choir girls sang songs about death. But the real punishment came next, because after that, they'd sew you inside a leather sack, and you wouldn't be alone. They'd throw in a dog, a monkey, a rooster, and a venomous snake, all of them alive, all of them just as terrified as you. Then the whole thing gets tossed into a river. You're trapped in total darkness, can't see, can't move, and the animals are biting, clawing, scratching at anything they can reach. Maybe you drown, maybe you might suffocate, or maybe you just bleed out from 100 different wounds before the water even fills your lungs. The Romans eventually stopped using the sack, but medieval Europe found something even simpler, and somehow just as effective at breaking people. It's called the strappado, and for this, all you need is a rope and a ceiling. It begins with your hands tied behind your back. Then a rope gets looped around your wrists and thrown over a beam or a pulley, and then they pull. But your shoulders aren't built to hold your entire body weight in that position. So within seconds, the pain is unbearable. Your shoulders start grinding against the socket, ligaments stretch, tendons tear, and then they let you drop. Not all the way to the ground, just a few feet. Just enough for the rope to suddenly jerk tight and rip your shoulders completely out of their sockets. Sometimes they'd add weights to your ankles just to make the damage worse. And because it's all internal, it leaves almost no marks. This was a favourite of the Spanish Inquisition. They'd use it in hidden chambers with thick stone walls, so no one could hear you scream. But at least with the strappado, you knew what was happening. You could see the rope, feel the pain, hear your own bones crack. Which brings us to something even more crazy. It's called the rack, and if you have seen Saw 3, you have seen a version of it. But the real thing is much worse. Look at this big wooden frame. It has rollers on each end and your wrists get chained to them. Then the torturer starts turning the handles. At first you feel tight, it is uncomfortable, but they keep turning. Your joints are the first to fail. Shoulders, hips, knees, elbows. They are not designed to handle this kind of pressure. The pain builds until you hear it. That first pop, that is likely your shoulder dislocating. Each joint separates from its socket with a horrible sound that echoes through the chamber, but your captors keep turning the handles. Now, your ligaments start tearing. Your tendons snap like rubber bands pulled too tight. Some victims were stretched so far that their limbs ripped completely off their bodies. Sometimes they burned you with torches while you were strapped down, or they stuck hot coals between your toes. In France, they added spikes to the wooden board underneath you. As your body stretched, the spikes dug deeper into your back. It is not a comforting thought. The rack was invented in ancient Greece, but it became most famous in the Tower of London. They called it the Duke of Exeter's daughter, after the man who brought it to England in 1447. Guy Fawkes was racked multiple times before he confessed. Anne Askew was tortured so badly on the rack in 1546 that she could not walk afterward. She had to be carried to her execution. This device was extremely brutal and it could permanently destroy your body. But the ancient Persians are said to have had something even worse. Have you ever heard of scaphism? Historians still argue about whether this was real or just propaganda to make the Persians look like monsters. Supposedly, you'd get trapped between two narrow boats or hollowed out tree trunks. Just your head, hands and feet sticking out, so you can't move and can't escape. Then they'd force feed you milk and honey, which gives you severe diarrhea. And remember, you're trapped, so you're just sitting in it for days, and then they leave you out in the sun, near a pond, or somewhere with lots of bugs. So first, you get flies, then maybe some wasps, just stinging your face over and over. Maggots start crawling in the wounds, in your eyes and mouth, and as the days go by and your waste piles up inside the boat, it attracts parasites. They start burrowing into your body through any opening they can find. So at this point, you're being eaten alive from the outside and the inside at the same time. And it takes about 17 days to finally die. Whether it was real or not, we'll never know for sure. But this next method we know happened, because the bodies were left on display for everyone to see. Impalement. This one's a classic, and one man turned it into psychological warfare. His name was Vlad the Impaler, and between 1456 and 1462, he impaled people like an absolute madman. Men, women, children. It didn't matter. An impalement is as nasty as it sounds. A long wooden stake, sharpened to a point, gets driven into the ground, and the victim gets positioned above it. Then the executioners push the stake up through the body, usually through the rectum or lower abdomen. Because why not, eh? Vlad's executioners were trained to angle the stake carefully to avoid hitting vital organs, because the goal wasn't to kill you fast. That would be too easy. It was to keep you alive as long as possible. The stake would slowly pierce through your body, sometimes coming out of your back, sometimes your chest, in the worst cases, through your mouth. Some victims stayed alive for hours, others for days, stuck on that stake, unable to move, unable to do anything but wait for the inevitable. In 1462, after defeating an Ottoman army, Vlad had 23,000 soldiers impaled, and then he just sat among them for 2 days, chilling. Enemy armies would literally turn around rather than march through what they called the Forest of the Impaled. The sight alone was enough to break soldiers who'd seen war their entire lives. But medieval England had something even worse than that. Something that turned execution into a living nightmare. It's called drawing and quartering, and it was reserved for one crime: high treason. If you betrayed the king, this is what happened. First, they tie you to a wooden frame called a hurdle. Then, horses drag you through the streets to the execution site. You're getting scraped across rough ground the entire way, so by the time you arrive, you're already covered in cuts. But that's just the beginning. Stage 2, they hang you, but not to kill you, just enough so that your face swells and turns purple, your eyes bulge, and you're gasping for air, right on the edge of passing out. Then comes stage 3, which is where it gets really bad. While you're still alive and conscious, the executioner cuts open your stomach, reaches inside, and pulls out your intestines, your liver, everything. Most people went into shock right here, some passed out, but the executioners would try to keep you awake, because they still weren't done. At stage 4, they cut off your limbs, sometimes with a sword or an axe, one by one. Other times they'd tie each arm and leg to a different horse and make them run in opposite directions, literally tearing your body apart. By this point, most people were already a goner from blood loss or shock, but not always, and even after that, it still wasn't over. Next, your head would get stuck on a pike and displayed on London Bridge. Your body parts would get sent to different cities and hung on gates as a warning. William Wallace, the guy from Braveheart, got drawn and quartered in 1305. It's one of the most iconic movie scenes you'll ever see, but there are still 2 more forms of punishment to go, and they're even more crazy than this. Because the Vikings had something called the Blood Eagle, and for a long time, historians thought it was just a legend, but recent research suggests it might have actually been possible. First, the victim gets positioned face down. The executioner makes deep cuts across their back, peeling away skin and muscle to expose the ribs underneath. Then they start cutting the ribs away from the spine one by one, carefully, because the goal isn't to kill you yet, it's to keep you alive long enough to finish the whole thing. Once the ribs are free, they spread them outward, and then they reach inside and pull your lungs out through the opening in your back. The whole point is to make it look kind of like wings. If you're really feeling grim, you can check this out in the TV show Vikings. And yeah, it's as horrifying as it sounds. The scene is so brutal, it became one of the most talked about moments in the entire series. But now it's time for the craziest punishment of them all. And it was reserved for greed. This is molten gold execution, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You're strapped down, your mouth gets forced open, and then they pour molten metal straight down your throat. Even though it's called gold, usually it was lead, because gold was too expensive. But the idea was the same. The metal gets heated until it's liquid, and then they tip it into your mouth. What happens next is almost instant. The moment that molten metal touches your throat, it creates a massive burst of steam. The pressure is so intense it can rupture your windpipe from the inside. Your lungs get scorched. The metal cools and hardens, forming a solid plug that blocks your airway completely. You're dead within seconds, but for those seconds, it's unimaginable pain. A Spanish governor in Ecuador got executed this way in 1599 by the Jivaro tribe. They were furious about being exploited in the gold trade, so they made him drink it. The Roman general Crassus might have died the same way. Some accounts say the Parthians poured molten gold down his throat after capturing him. Nothing says you were too greedy, quite like being killed by the thing you wanted most in the world. This next form of torture is completely different. It's called white torture, a modern form of punishment still being used today. You're put in a completely white room, white walls, white ceiling, white floor. The lights stay on 24 hours a day. These bright neon lights positioned so there are no shadows anywhere. The room is totally soundproof. The guards wear soft shoes so you can't hear footsteps. There are no windows, and there's no way to tell if it's day or night, which means time is pretty much non-existent. And then they just leave you there for weeks, months, sometimes years. Some forget their own names. Others can't tell what's real anymore. One survivor said it felt like someone was lying in the cell with him, even though he was completely alone. And when they finally let you out, your mind could be broken permanently. I don't know about you, but these are absolutely insane. And it's even more wild that some of these are still being used today.